Welcome to the 14th episode of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast. Before I intro this one, I wanted to remind you about an offer to all of our listeners from our sponsor Stratagens. If you go to stratagens.com, that's strategens.com, book a demo and enter the promotional code TIC2021, you'll get a discount and a free proof of concept. Anyway, back to the episode. In this one, me, Alan Walker, Alison Ettridge, Nick Brooks and Toby Coulshaw co-hosted an episode where we spoke to Elke Manjet of SAP. Elke is from one of the largest tech firms in the world and one of the most senior leaders we've ever interviewed, whilst also being one of the most candid and transparent. This was a super fun episode and we covered a lot. We heard Elke's view on the rise of talent intelligence, people-centric decision-making, elevating the work of TI to C-suite level, and how TI should kick in the door of business leaders to get in front of them, and a whole lot more. So get listening, get learning, and of course, have fun. Before we get on with the main event, I just wanted to remind you that this podcast is proudly sponsored by our friends at Stratagens, and here's a very well-spoken chap to tell you a little bit more about them.
Stratagens gives HR leaders the data they need to transform businesses with the speed and ease required in today's world. If you're ready to make decisions that aren't lengthy, costly, one-dimensional, or based on gut feeling, visit stratagens.com. That's STRATIGENS.com to register for a Wednesday demo drop-in and find out more.
Hello, I'm Alan Walker and welcome to episode 14 of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast. It feels like a while since I've said that, but here's that noise we all love.
Yay!
I'm joined by my co-hosts Alison Ettridge, Nick Brooks and Toby Coulshaw. Say hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
And of course, this show wouldn't be anything without our guests. And this time we have a proper big hitter with us. It's Elke Manjet of SAP. Welcome to the podcast, Elke. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
Hi there, Elke, leading talent attraction at SAP.
That's great. Thank you. It's great to have you on the show. Me and my co-host, of course, our listeners are looking forward to hearing more about you and your work at SAP. In just a minute, Toby's going to lead us through the news section, spotlighting some of the more compelling and thought-inducing topics from around the talent intelligence and wider people space, and we'll all get involved in a discussion around that. And then Nick and Alison will fire questions at Elke about her career and views on all things talent intelligence and anything else they think we might want to hear from. So let's do this thing. Toby, you're up first. What's happening in the world of talent intelligence?
Yes. So one of the most interesting articles I saw this week was around diversity and specifically around women in the workforce. It was a really interesting take by the FT, so Financial Times. And although there's been a really big negative impact of women in the workplace due to COVID-19, their stance, their argument was that in the overall, and the bigger trend is over the next coming years is going to be that women will dominate the workforce and actually come to redefine it. The points they're using was largely around how student representation is with male-female. So 59.5% of all college attendees are female, for example. And their point is that trend's been brewing for a while. It's, in their argument, going to have a big tailwind because of COVID-19, possibly returnships of mothers that stayed at home with children, and as the workforce and workplace is becoming more flexible and seeing more opportunities for remote work, flexi work, etc. Yeah, it's a really interesting take. I think that obviously diversity has been a hot topic and gender diversity has been a hot topic for probably a decade or so, and by and large, it's still something that most firms and most industries are struggling really to address and to get moving on. So yeah, it was an interesting read and a topic to see their take that they think that it will actually flip in the next coming years.
Yeah, I thought this one was really interesting because I think some of, and actually I'm not necessarily sure it's to do with the college piece. I think we've just been through such a seismic shift in workplaces in the last 12 months that, you know, the difference in flexible working, the reduction in the amount of travel, and really importantly, the number of men who have had the ability to spend more time at home co-parenting I think means that the playing field has levelled a bit in terms of people talking about their careers and expectations, and I mean that at an individual level and at a family level as much as at a corporate level. So I'm not sure it's to do with colleges. I think it's just a seismic shift in the workforce that we've seen in the last 12 months.
I agree. Yeah, I think, Alison, if you look at a lot of the enrolment rates in large economies around the world, often there is a higher representation of females, but you see the drop-off rate into the professional track, right? Post-education. But I think you're absolutely right. This shift in flexible work and rebalancing, I guess, the responsibilities between parents, like you say, kind of co-responsibility is going to be a great shift. But again, it's going to show the companies that truly and the organizations that embrace a true hybrid future will be setting themselves up to capitalize on diversity as a competitive advantage, right? And how they think about that. So I agree. I think the flex piece is really going to shift it as long as we see this as a long-term kind of staying initiative.
Yeah, I think that's right. I've heard probably from more men than women on this one, actually, which is really interesting. Which is, I've had the chance to take my kids to school. I'm not gonna lose that. I've seen their faces when you pick them up from school or whatever it might be. That was this whole section of life that historically they were not necessarily part of. And I'm not saying that was all down to women. It wasn't. Of course it wasn't. But I do think it's just a big shift.
Are you seeing any of this in SAP, Elke?
Well, yes, definitely. I mean, we do see the fact that men, dads, I guess I'm saying, are taking parental leave more, and obviously that's depending on how that's organized in the country. But as well, from a company perspective, we're very much supportive of that. To balance that playing field. To Alison's point, I have a bit of a sense and a fear, honestly, that the pandemic has pushed us backwards a bit, because what we're hearing is that in quite a few situations, it's still more leaning on women to take care of the kids and all of that daily arrangements, if you will. So we're ultra caring for our women population, especially those with kids, to make sure they understand there is that way back, and we embrace that, and we support them with whatever is required to get that managed.
I think that's so interesting. If I think of 2 or 3 different Zoom teams, whatever calls that I've been on this week, all with global corporates, all with senior female business leaders, and in almost all of them there was a child in the background, and nobody blinked, nobody cared. It was, and that just wouldn't have been the case 2 years ago. Nobody would have thought it was acceptable. And of course they were blurred backgrounds and as best you can, but I just think it's genuinely an amazing move for women to be able to be in a situation where that's acceptable.
I think that's the bigger piece. It's not the data is changing as such. I think it's the cultural transformation, the cultural changes happening around is setting the context to allow this to happen more.
Spot on. Yeah, absolutely, completely agree.
Yeah, and to chime in there, I think the flex work piece is really the most important thing there, in terms of flexing time, flexing place, but as well flexing job scope to some extent. We do see that people need a break, honestly, after these very intense months from all angles, right? Business, private life, and all of that. So. That's something that we're offering as much as possible for people to just take off a bit longer and then come back recharged. But as well, again, enlarging the scope of your role or sizing it to where you are in your life is a huge topic these days.
And that's going to form such an important part of workforce planning as we kind of move out of this period. The ramifications are, they're way more than talent intelligence actually in this space. It's how are we going to attract people? How are we going to retain people? How are we going to plan for a completely different looking workforce over the course of the next 5 to 10 years? I think it's super exciting.
Yeah, it is for sure. And if one thing we've learned, I'd say, is that we can deal with change, right? We can deal with the totally unknown that we couldn't imagine a year back or so. So I think that's encouraging. And the example you've given, Alison, on the kids being part of the telco, I would totally agree. I mean, it's totally accepted, and it seems such a minor thing, but I know for many moms, for many working parents, that's so easing and encouraging, that's just accepted, and they can continue both the parenting and their jobs and careers.
Yeah. There's something about, we talk a lot, don't we, about bringing whole self to work, and how that kind of helps to encourage diversity of thinking, helps to encourage innovation. It has much bigger ramifications than just having kids in the background. But I think that's what we're seeing is people really are bringing their whole self to work in a way that we couldn't have imagined happening not that long ago.
Did we actually interrupt Toby?
Probably. I do all the time.
He has these moments, Alec, where he just goes quiet. Don't worry, it's not a weird thing. It's just Toby. Toby, should we move on to the next piece of news?
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt. You're all having a lovely chat.
Sorry.
I thought I don't want to be the person that cuts off this fine conversation. I'm enjoying it. I'm listening.
Come on, Toby. Let's move on to the next one.
Next on the news front, this is, I think, an early signal for bigger things we're going to see coming in the next few months and quarters. Poland's labour market is slowing down a little, and there's a bit of a shortage of skilled workers. For me, when I look at this, I think the reason I say I think we're going to see more and more of this, I think it's the trend towards low-cost country. We've been doing this stuff for a long time. Low-cost countrying has been a popular thing, obviously, for many, many years now. But I think more recently, because of the pressures on hiring that we're facing at the moment, people are looking at alternative countries, alternative routes to hire. And they're looking, well, if we're all going fully digital, we don't need to be in this high-cost country anymore. So I think there's going to be more and more conversations looking towards low-cost and alternative cost locations, so whether it's near shore, offshore, etc. And I think that's really going to tighten things up. The Poland market was starting to tighten last year early on. It's really tightening up now. Growth in wages is kicking on. Yes, there's a high skill set. Yes, there's some really good labour over there, but it's definitely getting tougher. And I think we're going to see that really roll out through more and more of the low-cost countries that are kind of setting themselves up as global business service centres, shared service centres, those sorts of environments. And I think people have to start thinking about alternative locations once again. So what's that next tier, that next phase of business service centres? Where are they going to be? Do they even need to be in a set location? Obviously, some roles like customer service, we saw a lot go fully remote during this last 18 months. Is that the new norm, is to say, well, actually, certain roles would just have a fully hybrid setup and you can be wherever you want? But I think, the pressure on low-cost countries and shared service centre locations, I think, is going to really start ramping up because companies are looking towards these sort of places to cover the gaps in the workforce at the moment.
Yeah, and this is core business for us. So we've probably done more stratagems sales through the exploration of the global labour market and where do we need to be in order to optimise cost in the last 12 months than we did in the previous 2 years combined. And without a doubt, it's just businesses asking. And in fact, we were talking about Poland just last week, because when we run searches against particular skill sets, Warsaw and Krakow no longer come up as recommended by the system. Everything is moving further east, and particularly Bulgaria and Hungary and Romania. And so we're talking a lot about hot spots, not spots, and next spots. And Poland is slowly moving from a hot spot to a not spot for exactly that reason. And other places are becoming the next spots. And I think I'm not sure it's driven by cost. I think it's driven by the fact that people are genuinely saying, the global labour market is our pool now, and it's really hard to hire. And so it's no longer just service centre roles. It's almost anything where they're skilled workers.
And are there, you guys are much closer to this than me because it's kind of what you do for a day job, but are the pressures that are being felt in the countries that we're all residents of, so UK, Germany, US, are they global things? Is it stuff that's happening everywhere else as well in terms of talent shortages, just less extreme or even more extreme?
I think it's more extreme, particularly in the US. Yeah.
So I'd say, the heat in the talent market that we're seeing this year is crazy, is unbelievable. I've never seen this before. Now, I'm not in TA for my whole professional life, but I've always been in HR. So somehow you're looking into these topics, right? But it's unbelievable. And I would agree, Toby, or at least from an SAP perspective, such locations have started because they were low cost and they are still, depending how you're drawing the comparison. But for us, I'd say we're a truly global company. So countries like Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania to some extent, but then as well, India, China, Korea, you name it, are integral part of the business. So you have attrition there. And obviously, if you're looking at your growth and investment cases, you tend to go where you already are, right? Because you're providing people an environment to grow as well and to move from one team to the other and so on and so forth. But I've never seen a situation like this year where actually I feel you can't go anywhere or recommend any place to the business where you're saying, this is where you can get great talent fast without proactively reaching out and kind of developing the market.
Absolutely. And I think that's the piece. I think certain companies have shifted from that mindset of shared service center where it's a transactional and it's the low value work being moved to more of a global business services model where it's higher value, higher touch, but it's kind of the follow the sun. You want that support 24/7 and you can build at scale. I think there's still lots of countries that are big opportunities for this sort of development. But yeah, I think the pressure is definitely kicking in the traditional locations. The pressure is definitely kicking in. But I think it will even out essentially. The fact that they were low cost, the salaries come up, it suddenly the driver is potentially scale, not cost, and you have different conversations. I think the big overlay on all of this, which I don't think TI necessarily dives into as much as we could or should, is the cultural elements. And from a cultural stance, what's most appropriate in what countries and what sort of workforce. And I think that's going to be a really interesting overlay in the next couple of years to see how does that work? How do managers from the US, for example, manage teams remotely in Manila, or managing teams in Nigeria or South Africa or wherever it may be, or UK doing the same. I think there's big cultural elements that come into play there around communication, teamwork, etc., that we're just not necessarily all geared up for. And I think that's going to be a really interesting piece over the next few years.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think that we're seeing so I was talking to a business last night who are a big data company, and a UK business actually, but I was talking to their North American arm, and they were saying that last year they were recruiting, but this year they've done record levels of hiring. Right, so they're looking at a net 2,500 new recruits in North America alone this year, and so I think we've just been hit by this. Lots of people were quiet last year, then they've all come together. Then we've got lots of particularly tech businesses after the same skills, they're all at record levels of hiring. They're being forced to go global, right? They're just because there aren't enough people, full stop. So they're being forced to go global. How those people then get integrated into the business in the world that we now live, is really going to be a differentiator. But I don't think it'll start to show for probably 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Alison. It's connected to cost still, but time to hire has just become so much more pressurized, right? So it's looking at markets where there is lesser demand, there are larger volumes, there's greater percentages of early in career talent and academic feeders, right? And it's enabled businesses to be more agile in that. And actually, rather than saying, okay, where are we placing a single, say, sales or service center? Where else can we go? How can we get creative? And I think something you mentioned, Toby, as well, it struck a chord with me around the cultural piece. And I think about selling. And you think a lot of traditional large tech organizations have had single sales centers, and they've obviously hired in, relocated a lot of talent that speak the languages and enable them to sell into certain markets. But now you have employers thinking about, why don't we place individuals who live in that country, who are part of that economy, who are able to speak the language and understand the cultural nuances, and be much more distributed. So the whole kind of approach to selling in some ways can be more effective. You can target the markets and be in those markets rather than having to think about relocating and redistributing talent to large centers. So it's we're still in this funny zeitgeist moment. I think there's a stabilization to come and a lot of learning. So it's going to be fascinating, to your point, Alison, in the next sort of 3, 5, 10 to see how things level out, if at all.
And interestingly, the ones that are going to win are the ones that have now got a really strong culture of inclusion and belonging, where everybody feels part of something and everybody feels that their voice is worth listening to. And that's where I think the new war for talent is going to be won or lost. It's in Elke's world, right? It's in the how do we get the culture right, and then how do we make sure that we attract people who can come in and embrace that culture and want to do so.
Yeah, I think the overlay I'd say, though, and it kind of brings me on to the next topic that I wanted to raise in terms of news for today, is quite often we have huge talent pools available to us that I just don't think we're very good as employers engaging with. And I know SAP have done a lot more than most, so whether it's engaging with neurodiverse populations, etc. But there's big pockets of people that historically employers have been terrible at engaging with. And I think that's another huge opportunity at the moment, is to say, well, actually, who are the people that we could or should be looking at? What are the parallel skill sets we could have? What are the parallel apprenticeship paths we could run? Rather than historically, we're still really hiring against job titles, hiring against previous experience, not hiring for potential, but hiring on a CV. And I think we really need to start thinking differently and more holistically about that. And what the topic that was coming up was a paper on ageism, and how the gap between the kind of main 35 to 45 working population and those over 60s has got bigger for the first time in modern history. Historically, the workforce has been getting slightly older and older and older, and through this COVID period, it's the first time that's actually dropped. Doesn't sound like a huge amount. It's 0.9 percentage points, but in the scheme of the workforce, that's a huge amount. And by and large, that's because people have been working remotely, been seeing their family more, etc., and said, well, do you know what? I just don't want to keep doing that commute. I don't want to keep working through this retirement period. And they're seeing a huge exodus out of the workforce. And I think that's one of the triggers we're discussing on before the call about the HGV driver crisis in the UK. The average working population of an HGV driver is like 55 years old. I think there's a big population of older workers that historically it's been a really big missed opportunity in terms of the workforce. I think where ageism is still sadly rife. I think it's a really big issue, particularly in the tech companies and tech arena. I think it's a really big missed workforce. I think there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills. There was a paper, I believe, by Corn Ferry. I might have got that wrong, if I got that wrong, or maybe McKinsey. And it was highlighting that older workers, in inverted commas, and for that they were using geriatric millennials, so those basically at 40 or above, saying that they couldn't keep up with the digital transformation that we're going through at the moment. I just think those sorts of things aren't helping.
I was a geriatric mother and now I'm a geriatric millennial. I'm not sure I'm up for this at all.
Oh, geez. Well, as a geriatric who leads a digital transformation consultancy, this is a little bit worrying. I might have to change jobs and go get a job as a lorry driver. Jesus.
But it's terrifying. It's terrifying that these sorts of papers are out there and it's hitting, the leadership, etc. I think they're a big population. I think ageism is a huge issue, and there's been a couple of topics around it recently. I think it's a really big issue we need to solve. We're looking at sort of demographic cliffs of working populations all retiring, etc., and the boomer generation retiring. But there's still a lot of people that want to work and they just can't. They can't get back into the workforce, and I think there's a lot of ageism still going on.
I am. Look, I'm a 49-year-old female tech scale-up CEO. Right? I'm pretty unusual, just for the reasons that I'm old and I'm female. Never mind anything else. In this world, but and I think that ageism is, without a doubt, something that needs to be tackled in order for us to open up different workforces. It's almost part of diversity of thinking. Actually, it's not necessarily about bums on seats. It's about diversity of thinking and bringing some grey hairs to the table, right? Because those count for something. But if I'm completely honest, that the report that you highlighted to us beforehand, which talked about the trends and how it had been impacted by COVID, I think it's too short term. Because I think the reality is that last year we probably saw a lot of older workers come out of the workforce because of furlough and because of safety, actually, and not wanting to come back into the workforce until they felt safer.
Yeah, so I wonder whether they've also picked up some of the childcare fat as well for their younger kids who maybe can't afford to take any time off work at all. Maybe they're doing some of the childcare piece as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I think ageism is still a problem. I'm absolutely not arguing with that. I just think that the shift in the trend in the short term is probably too allied to the situation that we're hopefully finding our way out of.
Like we always say, it's not the data, it's the context.
Yeah, completely right.
And just one other factor, not all economies are equal, right? Because I think this report was in the context of the UK, Toby, whereas in the US, we're kind of seeing the opposite in terms of the cost of retirement is continuing to grow, and it's keeping or forcing individuals to stay in the workplace for longer, just to be able to secure their future health and retirement. And so there's different factors in different economies, but that doesn't obviously go to explain the gap in opportunity, right? And those getting left behind. And I think the other thing to consider is with this rapid digital transformation, time out of the workplace, it's the time you're out, things move even faster now, and you can get left behind even quicker. We talked about returnships obviously earlier as well in the context of working mothers. So that's something that really needs to be discussed and addressed continually, is how do we reintroduce and obviously bring those individuals up to speed with the movement of skills and the necessity of digital skills.
But I think you're raising the key point, Nick, given talent shortage basically all around the globe, right? I think we're all looking for the same skills and all tapping into the same gaps, kind of. I think that part of the population is still not tackled enough, I'd say, in terms of what we can do as companies to offer those upskilling, reskilling, whatever opportunities. And definitely as societies as well, we need to do more, especially in those countries with an aging population, and Germany clearly is one of them. And as far as I know, most of Europe actually has more of the same challenge, right? And I think one aspect of that, and Alison, you raised the whole topic of belonging, is people on the autistic spectrum and other talent that hasn't been as much in focus for us. What we are trying out this year is a cooperation with a company called 42. I'm sure you've heard of them. They are pretty much around the globe, and what they are doing is basically offering digital upskilling to people independent of their prerequisites. So somebody could be 16 or somebody could be 66, and as long as they pass the tests, they enter that education. And I was excited by that idea because I think it's such a strong idea, one of belonging and including everybody. And secondly, as well, just helping closing that digital skill gap in whatever age population. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm pretty excited about seeing the people joining for internships and hopefully then as well for permanent contracts at SAP.
That sounds really exciting.
Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Toby,
okay.
have you got one more news thing?
Well, I do. I was just going to say on that last point, I think it was really timely because I actually had a conversation this week about the fact that it was in the Talent Intelligence Collective monthly meetup, and we were talking about the fact that in a career you have 3 or 4 careers in a lifetime nowadays. But when you look at early career programs, when you look at kind of that entry-level career role, it's always for people that are young new grads. There's never an opportunity for that mid-career switch person to hit that. They could be a hyper of the future, but they might be hitting that career path at the age of 40 or 50. So I think, Elke, I think that's an awesome program. I think that's a really good idea, and I think more companies should be looking at that sort of thing. I think there's a lot of opportunity to use the experience and people that want to get back in at entry level and change their careers and career switch. But Alan, to your point, final bit of news. It was around Singapore specifically. So Singapore has been having a heck of a time through this whole COVID-19 period. Overall, the market's stabilizing, and it's not too bad in terms of unemployment rates, etc., etc. But there's been a really big shift in terms of what the workforce within Singapore is looking like. So you're seeing some big winners. So financial services, insurance industry, all doing well. The overall tech industry is doing very, very well. Some losers, pretty similar to most places, so services, construction, manufacturing, etc. But the most noticeable is foreign workers. And Singapore's seen a huge hit on its foreign workers, taking the brunt of job losses, with, I think it was the non-residents losing 21,000 jobs in Q2 of this year. So, the foreign worker piece is definitely taking a hit there. And I think that's something we've seen mirrored in previous podcasts we've discussed. It's happened in a few different locations and geographies. Singapore's definitely having a bit of a churn in terms of its workforce.
I'm a bit like the last one on this one, which is I think it's just too short-termism to see whether this is a long-term change or not. It feels as if you looked at a lot of countries, you would be seeing the same sort of shifts in the short term. And I think it will be interesting to look in the longer term.
We have to, Alison. You're absolutely right. And if you think about the types of lockdowns that we've seen and how that's been executed across different economies, it has prompted non-national workers to leave, knowing that they could be heavily restricted for longer periods of time, right? So if we're looking over the last 12 to 18 months, it could be a very much skewed sample. So I agree. I think we need to be kind of looking at it longer term, because Singapore is a place like Australia that the lockdowns have been extremely abrupt, strict and severe. And it has kind of prompted workers to say, okay, if I'm not going to see my family for the next few months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever, now's the time to go home. So that may be a large contributing factor.
That's what I'm hearing as well. Like no scientific proof points, but just real life proof points. Is that the Singapore market obviously is relying a lot on people who are willing to relocate to Singapore, and that is a challenge these days because with how the government manages COVID, which makes sense from many aspects, right? From the aspect of being there and potentially being locked in and not being able to travel as usual, frightens people from moving there at this point. That's at least our experience.
Yeah.
It kind of almost makes me think of, as employers, we all have our EVP, and it almost makes me think that there should be almost a CVP, so country value proposition. And I think in the future, when you're looking at kind of much more fluid talent markets and people being much more open, I think countries may almost have to kind of position themselves and have a CVP to attract or not the employees they want. I think it's people are getting much more aware of this sort of thing, of how you're treated in the bad times or tough times. It will reflect, and yeah, I think it's going to be interesting over the longer run. But I think, Nick, to your point around the skewed sample data set, I think that's one thing I echo from a few of the reports I've seen going around recently, particularly around kind of innovation during this period and people moving back to an office versus remote, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's some really, for me, dangerous data sets going around where it's data that's been taken during a pandemic environment in a less than ideal infrastructure situation, et cetera. And people are making some really big calls around how working from home is impacted or innovation is impacted from working from home, or productivity is impacted, a team environment is impacted, etc. I think it's all, to Alison, your point earlier, it's all just too reactive. We're trying to make sense of data sets, and we're trying to make sense of a world that still isn't normal. We're still not working in a normal working from home, remote working, flexi work environment. We're still not working in a normal situations. I think it's people are trying to get answers and kind of the perfect data and the perfect forecast when we're just not in a situation to get that yet.
And we've talked about this before. There's a fundamental difference between working from home and flexible working, right? Because for some people, working from home has meant sitting on the edge of a bed with a laptop balanced on their knee with kids in the background. And that's not a good working environment for anybody, right? But for others, it's meant something completely different. And I think we've got to figure out what that means over the next 12 months.
Totally. And Toby, I agree. I've seen a lot of similar reports. And I think sometimes what you have to be cautious of is there is a very profound and necessary narrative that the companies or the organizations are trying to convey, but they're backing it up with short-term kind of data and anecdotes, right? So if you think about the hybrid and remote shift, one of the big themes is promoting empathy among leadership and the understanding of how to manage a distributed workforce through such a tough time, right? And I think, again, it's using the signals and the stresses that we're seeing in the system now. So it's kind of promoting the right narrative and behaviors, but it's also runs the risk of setting some kind of dangerous precedents over time, right? Because it's too short-term an experiment to be deriving these kind of conclusions. So I think we do have to apply our intuition, I think, in terms of what numbers and conclusions we see.
Yeah, completely agree. But Alan, for once, I'm going to throw the baton over before you call time on me. And I'm going to say that's all the news for today.
Wow, I'm impressed. Well, listen, guys, I think it's time to do more chatting with Elke, actually. We've heard of you on what's happening in the world, but I think it's time to hear a little more about her, even. So, Nick, Alison, I'm going to throw the baton back at you, pair, as our interviewers extraordinaire, to step up to the plate, and I'll go on mute again. Alison, Nick, over to you.
How exciting. Nick, I'm jumping in before you do.
Go for it. I know the drill, Alison. I'm stepping back.
I missed a whole podcast, right? That's it. I'm back in again. So, Elke, one of the reasons why I'm really excited to be talking to you is actually because you're not somebody who's a leader in TI. And I think we can become very inward looking and navel gazing. And I look at your background, I think here is a lady who has spent 14 years with one of the biggest tech companies in the world that has been through lots of transformation, and a lady who has had loads of different roles, from HR business partner to HR tech to talent attraction. And I'd just love to hear more from you about what your view is on the rise of the term talent intelligence, and whether you think we've always been doing it.
There's a lot in that question, Alison. So
I was so excited it all came out.
Yeah, that's fine. Let me try to deal with it. So let me start by saying I don't think we've always been doing talent intelligence. At least I haven't seen that. I think talent intelligence is the professionalization, difficult word, of insights that we've gotten anecdotally in the past years And we are now getting in a very structured and very very organized way, if you will. I think as well that the need for this data has grown as companies globalize. One, we talked about that before, right? And as well as labor markets are getting tighter and tighter, and that again around the globe. So I think those are trends that increase the need for talent intelligence. Maybe it's as well, I'd say, the rise of a new generation of leaders who are embracing a broader picture in terms of their business, and not only the business outcomes, but the impact on society, trends like sustainability and all of that. I feel that businesses today, in comparison to maybe 10 years back, are much more aware of the whole environment and their role in society versus just the business results they are driving. And in that context, obviously, you need a broader picture and a broader set of data ultimately to operate with and to form your opinion and to educate your decisions.
Right there, in that answer, that was the reason why I was excited, because I think you've brought to the table this kind of this broader view, this wider view, and I wonder whether we're living in a world where business leaders used to say people are our greatest asset, and kind of 15 years ago it was a bit of a comment, and then 10 years ago it became quite important, and then 5 years ago actually business leaders genuinely started to embrace it. And now that we're living in this market where it's like, oh my God, it really is. People are just an asset, and therefore they've almost been forced to make their decision making people centric. Do you think? Are you seeing that outside of SAP?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that, and along with those statements around people are our most valued asset, we have this war of talent notion around since many years, right? But I do think many leaders didn't feel it because let's pick up Germany and SAP being the home country, having a strong brand, talent would relate towards you and come towards you without you being required to do a lot. That's 10 years back, for sure. And that has changed, right? With the startup scene coming up, with again things tightening across the globe. So I do think leaders at SAP, but as well, if I'm looking broader out there, have mean what they say by using those statements and understand that there's really something behind it in terms of how we drive business, but as well our people's strategy, so to say. And I think talent intelligence is more than talent insights, right? I mean, we're working, or our TI team is working with our CEO on various questions around how, let's say, the procurement business, obviously a big evolution and interesting evolution in the pandemic, is shaping around the world, from the big players to the startup scene, and types of talent that are operating in that whole environment. So that's one example of a bit of a research we've done, and I think it's been super exciting, not only for us but as well for the CEO to get that really broad picture about where talent and businesses evolve. In a time that hits that business like definitely never before.
And that's so interesting, isn't it? It's where businesses have been through rapid transformation that's impacted on the types of people that they need. Suddenly this rise of we need to make data-driven, people-centric decisions, has just imploded. And whether that's called talent intelligence or whether it's people analytics or whether it's a combination of those two things, the rise in the business leader population, I think, is invaluable to the whole industry. I've got one more question, Nick, and then I'll try and be less excited. You talked about the startup scene, Elke, and I'm really fascinated by this, particularly when you were in your sort of SVP for HR products and innovation. Externally, SAP seems to embrace working with startups in order to try new things, right?
Yeah.
And actually, some of that, I think, is because the startup ecosystem in Germany is very strong, right? But I'm keen really to hear your views on whether you think other businesses should be embracing startups to drive innovation, particularly in the HR tech world.
So the very short answer to that, Alison, is yes.
Mm-hmm.
The longer answer is that is around the question of how do you drive disruptive innovation in a big global company and player, right? And I think SAP, like probably many other companies, is trying to find ways and to nurture opportunities and environments and events where people can come up with creative ideas, can take them further, and can ultimately implement them to make our products and services and sometimes as well us as people better. But typically the real disruptive innovation happens rather at the edges or the interfaces versus the core of a business, right? And I think that's the idea behind nurturing a startup scene, and we have a team that's called SAP.io here that is nurturing SAP internal startups, but as well as startups out there. And I think it's an amazing cross-pollination of ideas and businesses and where businesses can go. And I actually have the honor and pleasure to be at the advisory board of Brilliant Hire, one SAP.io startup that are in the HR space, and I'm always super excited about. It's a team of 20 people, I think, if at all, young people typically, who obviously don't have strong experience and insights into the business, but they come with great ideas. They maybe come with great tech skills, great analytical skills, and we've been able to achieve a lot for them and with them. And some of the product pieces they built, we actually are implementing for us in TA at SAP, and at the same time we are giving back, if you will, by helping them understand the business of such a large-scale company better and how they can help their customers at that very, very early stage of the business. So I find it a super exciting place to be, and I'm really, really grateful. I can include that in my scope and get that experience and that learning.
It sounds fantastic, and actually, I think we're seeing more and more collaboration, aren't we, between big corporates and smaller businesses, because everyone's striving for the same things, right? The big corporates want innovation, the young businesses are driving innovation, but actually they also need some experience, and where the two meet, magic happens, I think.
Yeah, and they need they need help to grow often, right? At certain critical points of their business evolution, the question is how can I take the next level, and that's where I think we can provide great help.
Very cool. Nick.
Yeah, love this discussion. It makes me think of, spot the Microsoft guy for a second, the famous Bill Gates definition of platform. And he talks to it as when the economic value to everybody that uses it exceeds the value of the company that creates the platform. So it's about like large organizations like SAP and Microsoft enabling startups, enabling channels, enabling that build on, build with philosophy, and obviously working together to support the digital transformation of customers. So it's such a profound and important kind of shift that we're seeing. Elke, I would love to go back to a couple of comments you made earlier. So I loved your response, by the way, on kind of what TI is to you and the notion of it shifting from anecdotal to being professionalized in a way. And the example you shared of working with your CEO's office on the procurement piece is incredible. So I would love to know, and I think our listeners would find it beneficial, what were the steps that you took as a leader and within SAP that enabled you to elevate the work to that kind of level, to working with the CEO? And how did it really shift the conversation and enable a different type of partnership and dialogue with that level of seniority?
That's a really good question, Nick. And let me start by saying that that TI at SAP is a pretty new function. So when I took on the role as TA lead, which is back mid 2019. And went a bit on a research journey, I guess, first and foremost to see what other organizations doing, what are the pieces where we're strong, and others where we can evolve. That was for me pretty early, a pretty obvious gap that we have. So it started by building a business case and going to the CHRO at that time to say, I think this is a missing critical piece for the success of our function and ultimately the company in the future. So we've gotten that go, and just early 2020 we started building the team and building kind of the processes and the engagement in parallel, right? I do think, I do believe in those early successes that you need to show to the business for them to understand and be convinced that it's the right way to go. Especially with talent intelligence, I feel that it's a bit tough sometimes to explain what it actually is and what it does. Unless people really see it and are into it. I think we managed well to show some impact pretty early with a pretty small and new team that just started and rallied, and we've grown it from there. We didn't start with the CEO. We did start with some business areas and business leader who really had high talent need in some very hot areas, for example, security, but as well, the diversity topic has been top of mind for the TI team right from the start. So that proactive research and reach out to women talent in our space, and as well showing the business where talent is that is not in our, let me say, usual patterns, but could be a great addition to our business and our culture. Those have been a few early wins that we could show to the business, and that were very convincing, to the point where leaders said, I need to have access to Teresa's team to be able to shape my strategy and my way forward, which is always a great position to be in, right? At a certain point, I had the opportunity, being in the lucky situation that our CEO was our CHRO for a few months, basically the full last year. So I just had the opportunity to share with him what we're doing, what the TI team is doing, what they had impacted, and from there we've gotten actually a whole package of mandates that the team started working on. And as he and his more direct team have seen the data, the insights, there was actually some excitement to the point where we've gotten those broader mandates. right? Because for us, TI is part of TA, which I know is not the case in every company. So that's a challenge and an opportunity. And the challenge is to overcome that notion of it's about filling recs, right? We can bring the really broad, big picture to the table to help business leaders up to the CEO understand what happens out there and take conclusions for our business. Does that answer the question, Nick? I went a bit apart, I feel.
No, super comprehensive. That was fantastic, because I think you're absolutely right. It's a journey, and I think this is not uncommon, right? You start to explain this new capability to business partners, and it doesn't always land immediately. Mm-hmm. But when you get into the work, or you start to share provocative insights, which can very often be competitive intelligence or solving for very immediate needs and bringing context to quite challenging discussions like DEI, that's when it starts to come to light. So you've got to kind of show your hand, haven't you? And over time, kind of start to do some internal networking and development. But it sounds like you've also capitalized on the great relationships you've had at a leadership level to get it inserted in the right places. And I also just want to call out how important it is, the distinction you made between filling recs versus strategic application. And we talk about this at length on this podcast and within the community. And it really is about that. It's often more upstream, higher order decision making and strategy that this capability can really, really influence. I saw Toby, I think you had your hand up. Did you have a question that you wanted to jump in?
I did, but we kind of touched on it in the answer already. It was just that I'm very conscious a lot of teams that are in TI kind of get stuck in that sourcing intel, the recruitment piece. And it was really just to ask Elke whether you think they should ask for permission or for forgiveness. And what I mean by that is, I think quite often they get stuck in that silo, and they wait for permission to go and talk to the business, or go and talk to leaders, or just put any work beyond the recruiter, and they kind of feel like it's the recruiter's relationship. As somebody that leads functions and kind of sees things much broader, do you think these teams generally, should we be waiting for that door to be opened a little bit, or should we just go and kick it in and go out and talk to the business and show what the abilities there are within these TI functions?
I definitely say go kick in that door. I mean, that's what basically we've done, right? I felt like I'm in a selling mode for probably 6 months only, right? Talking about TI and what it could bring without even having a team and a process and an approach in place, right? But it did help to get people going around the idea and I guess spark their interest very simply in terms of how it can help their business. And then as we could work on some mandates and show the impact, things evolve naturally to some extent, I'd say. However, one learning that we had, Toby, and where we adjusted our setup in TI a bit, was that there was a bit of a confusion among, are you doing sourcing, and maybe a very sophisticated sourcing, and are you doing talent research intelligence? So what we did beginning of this year is to actually split the team around these two focuses, so that it's clear a part of the team is working on critical hiring demand, and a small part of the team is focusing on pure research, basically, and insights. We've realized that kind of in the daily life, in the daily heat, that gets a bit challenging if the single consultant is trying to kind of sort that out.
I think that's
really good idea.
Yeah, really good idea. I think one of the things that and actually we should say that we're going to schedule Teresa into the podcast for Q2 in 2022. So it's important that Teresa comes and talks about the function that she has built and where it's going. But we wanted her to give us some time to kind of make sure she'd got enough under the table to be able to share. Based on what you're saying,
that's very kind of you.
Based on what you're saying, Elke, it doesn't sound like she's going to need that long, to be honest, if you've given her a whole package of mandates. I've just got one question, actually, which I think is quite interesting. You talked about building the business case and taking it to the CHRO. Mm-hmm. And you talked about this being a missing critical piece. If you were giving one piece of advice to a CHRO in a global corporate right now who hadn't got a TI function, what would you be saying that they're missing?
Well, they are missing an educated view on where the market is, and maybe more important, on where the market could go. And they are missing a strategic conversation with their business. And our learning clearly is that the TI conversation, if I might call it like that, to just simplify, has elevated our conversations and our relationship with the business to a totally different level. Because we know business leaders, we're having all of these trends out there, right? And we talked a bit about flex work, for example. My experience is that many business leaders want to understand that deeper in terms of what does that mean for my business? What does that mean for my ability to attract or retain talent, right? I think it's tough to ask the recruiter, the TA advisor to answer that question, right? They wouldn't be equipped typically as much as I think we obviously try to equip them, but the broader and a more strategic picture, I think, can come from a TI function whose daily breathing it is to pull that data and to understand that data and to make sense of that data, right? To Toby's earlier point, we're seeing some research where we're saying, how much does it actually matter, right? So I think there is an art and a science in being able to understand what you're seeing.
I absolutely love that. Thank you.
Guys, I'm going to have to do that big bad host thing. We've done an hour.
I know.
Oh, wow. That's unbelievable.
So easily. That just shows how brilliant you were, Elke.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
But it is time to draw a close, and it's time to release you back into the wild so you can continue with some of that great work you talked about earlier. It's been absolutely lovely having you on the podcast, Elke. I've had great fun listening. How was the experience for you?
It was great. This is a fun team. So definitely the highlight of my week, I'd say.
Oh, wow.
Wow, it's Thursday.
Yeah, we won't tell anyone at SAP, don't worry. That's fantastic. Thanks for coming on. It's been the highlight of my week also. And, as ever, to all of our listeners, the usual, massive thanks for supporting us. Keep telling your friends about us. And if you aren't telling your friends about us, then start telling your friends about us. And either way, guys, stay intelligent. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for listening. Before you go, I wanted for the last time to remind you about our generous sponsor, Stratagens. Here's that posh chap again, telling you about their fabulous product.
Stratagens gives HR leaders the data they need to transform businesses with the speed and ease required in today's world. If you're ready to make decisions that aren't lengthy, costly, one-dimensional, or based on gut feeling, visit stratagens.com. That's stratagens.com to register for a Wednesday demo drop-in and find out more.